Friends, now I will go deeper into population dynamics. In the previous lecture, I said that in demographic dynamics or population dynamics, we study relationship between age and sex composition of population on the one hand and demographic processes on the other. I also showed how composition of population or profile of population according to socioeconomic characteristics is shown, and in this lecture I will focus more on demographic processes. So, as I said earlier, demographic processes are 5: nuptiality or marriage, fertility, mortality, migration and social mobility. I may also add here that demographic studies are focused more on fertility and mortality, but because nuptiality or marriage affects fertility, most of the studies of demography have been undertaken in 1950s and 60s, when the world population was so called exploding and everyone was worried what will happen to the future of world population if fertility is not controlled in the less developed countries. So, studies focus on fertility. Studies also focus on mortality, because mortality was one of the determinants of fertility, and fertility depends on age of population at which commonly marriages take place, or average age of marriage. If marriages take place early, then there is much more reproductive time, a bigger reproductive time, a greater span of reproductive period available for childbirth, and fertility will be high. If age of marriage increases, if people start marrying at say 25, 26, then the reproductive span is shortened and fertility declines. And some of you may be knowing that Government of India has fixed legal minimum age of 18 years for girls and 21 years for boys. Among other things, a major consideration in raising age of marriage has been the concern about high fertility. Okay. Migration is less studied. It is mostly in the context of rural to urban that migration has been studied. Interstate, international migration has been less studied, except that some people have analyzed census figures and have seen which states are in migrating, which states are out migrating, what are the regions, how does migration relate to employment and so on. Social mobility is one part of demographic processes which is rather ignored. Now, in nuptiality there are various forms of marriage and kinship across cultures. For example, consanguineous marriages or marriages among relatives are quite prevalent in South India, but such marriages would be considered incest in North India. Kinship patterns are different in different parts of the country, and sociologists have extensively written on this. Yet in most societies, sexual relationships or childbirth begin after marriage, and therefore, age of marriage is of immense importance to study of fertility. Also to study of infant and maternal mortality, because there is a relationship between age of marriage on the one hand and infant and maternal mortality. Maternal mortality refers to deaths of mothers during pregnancy and within a period of 42 days after childbirth. Raising marriage age also provides time to study and leads to women empowerment. That is why nuptiality is of interest. Lack of life skills if marriages are early leads to teenage pregnancy and various forms of vulnerabilities among girls. In India, marriage also leads to migration, because in India, according to our social institutions, marriage is caste endogamous within caste and village exogamous outside the village. So, an overwhelming majority of cases, marriage of a girl will make her migrant, because she cannot marry in the same village. Urban areas are different. In urban area, large urban areas, marriages within the metropolitan city or within urban areas are possible, but in case of villages, marriage leads to migration. Regarding fertility, there is a direct relationship of fertility with population growth. You have seen that natural growth equal to birth rate minus death rate. So, if birth rate is high, then population growth rate is also high. Fertility is also seen as an indicator of women empowerment. High fertility interferes with women's work. It affects reproductive health, which is of a great concern now in 2019, and infant and maternal mortality. High fertility also leads to malnutrition among women. Roughly half of our women suffer from malnutrition, and high fertility is one of the reasons why they have anemia or why they suffer from malnutrition. Changes in mode of production, westernization and value of children affect or determine fertility levels. How? For example, according to one social theorist, in the past when fertility was high, most people worked on the family farms or in the family business, but with changes in mode of production from familial mode of production to non-familial mode of production, children looking outside for employment, they need to be educated and parents have to spend money on them. Parents have to spend money on their education, training, for preparing them to get a job outside family, and so the cost of children rises, and in modern society there is very little benefit of children, and therefore, this change in net flow of wealth, there is some flow of wealth from parents to children, some children to parents. This change in the net flow of wealth between parents and children leads to fertility decline, and fertility also affect the age distribution of population. The major reason why the developed countries are facing aging is not so much the rise in life expectancy as is commonly believed to be the case, it is actually the decline in fertility. When fertility declines, then the percentage of older population starts rising. Fertility is a complex issue. It has a biological component, and biologically a woman can somebody may ask a question, how many children a woman can produce? Biologically a woman can produce 16 children during the reproductive period 15 to 49 easily. Some people even estimate that a woman can produce 30-35 children. Now, natural fertility means what has been observed on the basis of surveys or field work is that it was a Hutterite population, tribal population of United States, in which maximum fertility of average of 12 children was found. There is a social component in fertility, and there is an interesting theory. I thought I should talk to you about this theory of intermediate variables. Davis and Blake. Davis is Kingsley Davis, our famous sociologist, who wrote a basic textbook of sociology, Human Society, and Judith Blake, his wife. They wrote a theory of intermediate variables in terms of which you can analyze what impact sociological or economic or psychological variables may have on the fertility, overall fertility levels in the country. Mortality has a direct connection with population growth rate like fertility. It because natural growth rate equal to birth rate minus death rate. So, obviously, if death rate declines, then the growth rate of population, natural growth rate increases. Now, if mortality also determines motivation to limit childbearing. If mortality is high, then due to the fear that some children might die, either people will produce more children, or if some children have died, then they would like to replace them. So, fertility would be higher. Decline in infant mortality, decline in child mortality have been a major motivational factor in reduction of fertility. Similarly, adult mortality is of special importance, and the factors of adult mortality are different from factors of child mortality and maternal mortality. Old age mortality has other special issues. It requires geriatric care, it requires specialization for treatment of diseases of old age. Now, causes of deaths are often divided into categories like communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, and injuries and accidents. In the past, when mortality was high, it was largely because of communicable diseases, kala jar, smallpox, tuberculosis, malaria, chicken pox, diarrhea, dysentery, various kinds of fevers. Communicable diseases were a major factor in mortality when mortality was high. Now, in developed countries about 300 years ago, and in less developed countries about 70 years ago, mortality started declining, and that was largely, initially it was largely due to control of communicable diseases. Then there are non-communicable diseases, cancer, cardiovascular diseases and diseases of old age, stroke, etc., blood pressure. They are diseases which come under non-communicable diseases, and they are often called lifestyle diseases also, among which stress can be a factor, age can be a factor, and which are more difficult to treat as compared to communicable diseases. Communicable diseases are easier to treat. I remember that in Sri Lanka around 1945, in just 1 year, death rate reduced by 50%, and the reason was simple: spray of DDT. Now, DDT spray controlled malaria and the death rate declined by half. There is no such panacea for cancers and cardiovascular diseases and other lifestyle or non-communicable diseases. Then injuries and accidents also take some toll of life in all countries. Now, with development, socio-economic development, education, some people said due to state formation, rise of nation states, mortality started declining, and initial changes in mortality affects child dependent. Initial, because decline in infant mortality means that the number of children expands immediately. It is mainly a biological issue, and all governments want to spend on health, they want to raise life expectancy. Everybody wants to achieve life expectancy of the developed countries. Do you know what is the life expectancy of India? Life expectancy of females in some of the developed countries is as high as 82 or 83, but in India our life expectancy is still around 70. We will talk about life expectancy later when it comes to measures of mortality. Then migration is divided into two parts: internal migration or within the country, and international migration or migration between countries. It affects growth rate of population at two places. Unlike fertility and mortality, migration affects the growth rate of population of place of origin and also of place of destination. If people migrate from India to Canada, then growth rate of both the countries, India and Canada, are affected. Migrants are particularly susceptible to certain vulnerabilities and alienation. It takes time to have acculturation or assimilation, but for initial period they suffer from alienation, and some studies have shown that migrants are vulnerable to infections like HIV. Migrants are often seen as a threat to the culture and economy, because when people migrate, maybe they migrate for the reason of employment, but they also carry their own language, their culture, their religion along with them to a new country. And the countrymen of this new country, place of destination, may find the increasing number of aliens, people belonging to another language, another culture, another religion, quite threatening. The example of Germany, where Turkish migrants form an increasing proportion, is one such example. There are some Gulf countries where almost half of their population consists of migrants, and mostly migrants from Asia. And resolving conflicts between migrants and natives becomes a major issue then. Migration is a major component in globalization, which is defined as movement of men, material and information. It is a major policy issue for some countries like China. Rural to urban migration is controlled. In United States, in the recent past, they have put lots of restrictions on issuing green cards or in giving citizenship to foreigners, because of the apprehension that if more jobs go to outsiders, then the insiders suffer from heavy unemployment. Now, in some countries migrants have lower fertility, in some countries higher fertility. So, migration and fertility are also associated. It is most complex to theorize because it is purely social, most complex issue. It is purely a sociological issue. It depends on push factors, pull factors, personality of migrants, and is connected with the characteristics of place of origin and place of destination. Social mobility, I said, is less studied, but all societies are stratified to different extent. Some are more open, some are more closed. Poor countries are relatively rigidly stratified. Social mobility refers to intergenerational or intragenerational. Intra means in the same generation, movement of people from one social stratum to another. Degree of openness varies from country to country. Mobility can be of individuals, mobility can be of groups, and mobility is often a factor in fertility decline. According to a famous theory by Dumont, fertility started declining in European countries largely because of the possibility of mobility, and because people felt that now there are lots of opportunities, and if they have a small number of children, that will be good for their children and also for themselves. So, this is one explanation of fertility. This is not the only explanation, and industrialization leads to mobility is obvious. Industrialization leads to rural urban migration, industrialization leads to globalization, migration from one country to another, and migration from one part of the country which is industrially deficient to another part of the country where more industries are located, like migration from Bihar to Maharashtra, because Maharashtra is more industrialized, Bihar is less industrialized. So, people move from Bihar to Maharashtra. And one of the consequences of migration, internal migration, is urbanization. To Louis Wirth, urbanization may be viewed from three different perspectives: demographic, which means percentage rise in urban population, and this percentage rise in urban population also leads to a socio-institutional change and cultural and behavioral changes at the individual level, at the group level. Urban localities differ from rural localities usually in terms of size, density, diversity, organizational and institutional forms, beliefs, values and behavior. Urbanization needs a definition. In the context of our country, there are two definitions. One is called statutory definition. This is first definition. All places with a municipality, corporation, cantonment board or notified town area are statutorily urban areas. Then there are census definition or demographic definitions, according to which a minimum population of 5,000, at least 75% of male main working population engaged in non-agricultural pursuits, and density of population of at least 400 persons per square kilometer defines a locality as urban. So, these are statutory and census definitions of urbanization. Now, you may like to have some basic idea of what is happening to level of urbanization in the country. Now, in around 2000, you see percentage urban 2051, 2000 is the year when first time world population becomes majorly urban. So, more than half population of the world was living in urban areas, but there were differences between less developed and developed. In less developed countries only 45%, while in more developed countries on the average 75% population was living in urban areas. World population is urbanizing. Annual growth rate of urban population is 2.5, more developed countries 0.8 due to fall in fertility, and less developed countries urban areas are growing at 3.5%. This is trend of urbanization in India. I said that in the beginning of the last century, nearly 10% population, only 238 million were living in urban areas, while today this is 2011 census. So, in 11 census 31.16% population or 1.210 million people of India. Out of this population of 1.210 million in India, 377 I said that 238 million were living in 1901 in urban areas. It should be seen as 26 million people were living in urban areas in India in 1901. This is total population, this is rural, this is urban, and this urban population of India has increased from 26 million to 377 million. Such a rise that in the beginning of the last century, only 10% population of India was living in urban areas. In terms of size, it was 26 million. Today, I said 33, but in 2011 census, 31.16% population was living in urban areas, and in terms of absolute size, it was 377 million. These are some other characteristics of urban population. Population decadal growth rate 31.80, natural growth rate 12.8. The difference between decadal growth rate and natural growth rate 19.0, which is mostly due to migration. So, natural growth rate of urban areas is 12.8%, contribution of migration is 19%, and thus the ratio of natural growth to decadal growth is 40.25. That means, migration is contributing more to urbanization of the country. Now, at the end I ask you a few questions, think about them. To what level fertility may decline? Demographic processes are fertility, mortality, etc. Let us raise some questions about them. To what level fertility may decline? How long people can live? Expectancy in India today is 70. Can it be 80? Can it be 90? Can it be 100? Can migration be stopped? Can all people belong to the same class? If not, what percentage of population can join the upper class? Can India become 100% urban or at least 85 or 90% urban, as is the case with the developed countries? Think about these questions and answers, partial answers at least to these questions will be found in the subsequent lectures. Thank you very much.